Has life been okay?
Life has been okay. Life has been busy. I mentioned, I think before that I have kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. They started kindergarten and second. I guess it's been about a month now, so it's not so new, but just finding that cadence again of any parents or parent figures are in the house. It's an adjustment. It's an adjustment to the start of the year. And I've shared before with you, Melinda, and I want to continue to share in these different spaces, speaking about vulnerability, especially as a mental health professional. Um, I've shared with in this space before as a podcast guest about my loss and grief and just continuing to be on the grief journey and find myself again. I know that's kind of a blanket term for a lot of us, but it's been true for me. And so this is part of that where I have taken some time for myself and then really been in a space where the things I'm involved in are really truly of what align with me and who I want to be and how I want to show up in this season of my life. And then continue to really stay rooted in what I want to bring to the world. So I love this space. I also love that self-awareness that I'm continuing to face myself with of we can easily be something for everybody. And that is not something I'm capable of right now because I've been so stretched. And also maybe don't want to be because I have to exercise my own boundaries as well. So that's the season I've been in, trying to find more joy and space for things that bring me joy.
Respect.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, well, no, I totally, I
Mm,
mean, yes, me too, in different ways at the
mm,
moment, which, you know a little bit about because we chat
mm,
on the side and send each other voice notes and keep each other
yes.
updated on all the personal and some of the things that I'm going through at the moment that I'm not ready to
Thank
share
you.
yet, but um yeah, I appreciate you always making the space even though you do have so much on your plate. Like for those of you out there that might not have heard episode number 1 where I talked about Christine's experience and background. She
Mm,
just has so much on her plate. She has her own nonprofit called Soul Sisters. She's planning a fundraiser for at the moment, and I'm so excited to be a panelist on. It's going to be
yay.
at the end of October, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
in Oakland, California, and so this will come out a few weeks before then. So if you're hearing this, you can
Good.
go
Please
RSVP
go.
and attend or donate to her beautiful cause. I'm so excited to become part of it in even just a small way
Mm,
this time.
thank
But yeah,
you.
Dr. Christine and I have a lot of projects in the works. She's coming on to speak for Sephora soon. And then we're
Yes,
meeting here for the Beauty Anonymous as well.
that's
So we
right.
got our plate full.
So much that we do. Beautiful overlap. Hmm.
Well, without further ado, I always want to chat with you and we can chat for ages, but I know these
Thank
episodes are a
you.
little bit more snackable. So excited to talk about our subject today. As always, we ask everyone out there to submit any questions, topics, themes that they're interested in us exploring with Dr. Coleman from her expert POV. This
Mm,
time around, Dr. Coleman and I landed on the theme of um, body image, body dysmorphia, and touching on the GLP-1 medicine that is such a
mm,
hot topic at the moment and how that
uh-huh.
relates to our self-image and interpretation of beauty and all of those things that we talk
Mm,
about here on the Beauty Manifest. Um, Christine, do you want to jump
yeah.
off?
Yeah. Let's dive in. Thank you for kicking us off, Melinda. I am really excited about this topic. Even our first topic was already so just invigorating and because it's so real. And again, I think that it's so important for us to recognize that this podcast is such a platform to be, quote, real and raw, and to bring in someone like me to talk about some topics that are swirled in current events and trends, but also pertain to our mental health and well-being is just so important and significant. And I hope that anybody listening or watching can just take away even one nugget for yourself. That's my whole hope in being here with you all. Um, let's talk a little bit about what body dysmorphia is. And I want to be really thoughtful about this term. I always want to be thoughtful about terms, especially as a mental health professional, because I'm not here to diagnose anybody. This is not an opportunity or intention to diagnose anyone in this space. This is meant to provide information, some education, and hopefully some insight and to be thought provoking for us to just look within ourselves and recognize, where do I fall in line with this? Because first and foremost, my definition, body dysmorphia, I'm going to read it here, is a mental health condition where someone is preoccupied with real or perceived, oftentimes perceived, flaws in their appearance. And so when we think about that, it is very natural and understandable for us to all have our little things, our insecurities, or, oh, I don't like this part about myself, or I pay attention to these parts of me that maybe don't always make me feel so positive about myself. That is a very natural, understandable part of our human experience.
We're
When we
only
think about the
human in this society.
okay. Yes, exactly, and you bring up a really great point, that when we start adding on different cultural, societal influences, that can also cause us to look at ourselves in a different way too. It can make us more hyper focused on some of those quote unquote flaws that we might have. And then we add on just different lived experiences that we've had that have been traumatic or have been called out that make us feel more insecure or hyper focused on some of those flaws. So, to be really clear, body dysmorphia and body dysmorphia disorder really lies around our own perceptions that sometimes again might be like, oh, I have a skin condition and I notice that and I don't like it. It makes me feel a little embarrassed or uncomfortable. Okay, like that's real, right? That's real. We might become obsessed. We might have a hyper focus or a compulsive behaviors around that. That's really what differentiates the disorder or the dysmorphia part that goes into a bit further down the line of I notice it's an everyday thing versus I can't stop thinking about this or focusing on this. Does that make sense? So,
Right, when it, like, becomes consuming.
yes, which is a lot of what we can say about mental health conditions, mental health disorders, or even things that are diagnosable when they really start to
Sure.
get in the way of our everyday life, when they really start to impact our relationships, including our relationships with ourselves. So I'm going to stop there to see if you have any thoughts before I continue forward.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that I had never thought about the definition of body dysmorphia and realized that it can be real or perceived. Like, I guess in my head, I just thought it was perceived, but a
Mhm,
real situation that becomes consuming, that totally makes sense that that also falls under the definition,
mhm.
and is equally as, consuming, I'm sure, if you're experiencing it. But I'm really glad that we're talking about this because I've never been diagnosed with body dysmorphia. And I think a lot of mental health terms are kind of thrown around loosely that we have to be careful about because so
Mm,
many people do experience it and identify with it. But growing up, I think when you and I were chatting, I even mentioned this growing up. I felt my girlfriends would tell me that they felt like I had body dysmorphia because maybe because I was so consumed in it, and I don't know, I'm assuming mine was always perceived. Um,
mhm.
of course, that's everyone's own perception, I guess, but, I think so many of us experience some level of body dysmorphia or a version of the definition of it, um, because we're fed such unrealistic beauty standards and imagery on a regular basis that I think it starts to skew our perception because mentally it creates this shame and self-hate, and the mind is powerful. You can
Mm.
be looking with your eyes, but you are perceiving through your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about, I'll just be real. I think one of the things that have been commented on in my life is my nose. I'll say my beautiful indigenous
Oh.
nose, and it has been something that has been a journey. I'll say, and I bring that up because there's no denying that my nose is bigger than some other people's noses. I've also been shamed for my nose. I've also considered getting my nose altered and surgically. And there are different back and forths that I've gone through. Being a body positive activist for a long time, I go back and forth because the pull to certain beauty standards is so high, especially Euro standards where noses are super tiny. And there are so many things that we can pick apart, right? And try to compare to the default of beauty standards. But for me and my
Yes.
nose, I've gone back and forth between not only my body positive stance, but also my stance on my culture. This is my grandma's nose. This is my Persian side of my nose. This is indigenous to my culture. And when I think about it that way, it is, even though I won't lie, it's not to say that that's powered me through and I have no thoughts about changing it. Those are the dualities of our wrestling. So when we talk about real or
Yeah.
perceived, Melinda, I think you bring up a really good point of like, well, there's some parts that are evident, right? Like again, I mentioned a skin condition. But the perception or the perceived is sometimes it's like, what are you talking about? Why do you think that I'm gonna use this, it's gonna sound exaggerated, but why do you think that why does one think that their thighs are look like elephant sized thighs? Like those are the types of things that are like, yes, this is exaggerated. That's in your mind. But people walk in their minds and think my thigh is the size of an elephant. And then when they look at themselves in the mirror, they might see something that it's actually not there. So my nose, again, I'm not going to be I'm not naive to the fact that I have an angled nose that looks indigenous compared to others that have smaller noses. But if I were to walk around and say, my nose is the largest nose that looks like Pinocchio, that's also not accurate either. So we have to just be thoughtful about what our perceptions are. Some of us might have had comments like mine, like, oh, Christine, you have such a big nose. Like, look out for this. I mean, I've had some pretty mean things said about my nose or people that stand out to it. And again, I keep on just using that as my vulnerable example, but we all have our things. But at what point, as we said, does it interfere with our everyday life to the point where I can't stop looking at my nose? When I look at myself in the mirror, my nose looks like a big Pinocchio nose. Or maybe the other flip side is I don't even want to look at myself. Just someone might think, I don't want to look at myself because when I look in there, my nose or whatever part of us, I'm going to see it and I don't want to. Those are the behavior changes that we're noticing here.
Yeah, and I appreciate thank you for sharing that. It's so funny
Mm,
because I have described you and thought of you in so many different ways as it relates to being a friend, a professional colleague, a
mm.
collaborator, and your nose has been the furthest thing from
Ah,
anything that I think
right.
about when I think about you and your
Mm.
beauty, what you bring to the table, which is just such
Thank you.
a good example of what the
Mm,
importance is behind these conversations. But thank you for sharing that vulnerability regardless. For me, it was definitely around body size growing up. I was
mm,
always really self conscious with my stomach and my upper arms. Even at the height of being a competitive dancer and being the most fit I've probably been in my life, just so critical. Um, but it's no surprise, when I look back and I look at my mother's relationship with self-image and society and all of that. It's no surprise that any of us are experiencing this. But what I appreciate that you bring up is, you mentioned that you're a body acceptance advocate, and that's been something of your passion in the past. And how do you navigate wanting to do things for yourself when it feels fun and aligned and coming from a good place,
mm,
versus wanting to just, fully accept yourself and not do those things. And it's something that I grapple with a lot myself because as a
mm,
mental health advocate and a public figure in the beauty industry, there's, you know, responsibility that comes with that. And we talked about it in our first episode where we talked about, sharing procedures
mm.
or different things that we do
Uh-huh.
publicly and, that responsibility or but it can be really difficult to identify where the source of the desire for
Mm.
change is.
It can.
Um,
It
like
can be.
what is driving your desire to lose weight or change your nose or
Mm,
get a
mm,
procedure done or whatever it might be. And I think that intention and that source is what's so important and that we have to come back to. And I've been
Yes.
challenged a little bit with this lately
Mm,
myself. And
mm,
so this is a good segue into the conversation of
mm,
the GLP-1
mm,
meds and that conversation that's happening as it relates to, of course, body image and body dysmorphia and trending body images, which is such a joke. Um, Bodies
mm,
cannot be trendy. Body types cannot be trendy.
mhm, mm,
But I personally recently made the decision to take a GLP-1. Um, I had gone through a series of events in my life that stressful is an understatement, and my stress
mm,
levels and cortisol levels, kinda messed with my hormones. I put on weight like I've never put on before, and I was the heaviest I've ever been, and I was pleasantly surprised with my ability to still love myself through that and coach myself through that, whereas in the past, I would have shame spiraled and potentially turned to, um, I don't know, even dabbling in my, prior eating disorder of, like, binging and purging or something like that. Whereas this time, although it was still very challenging, I I took my time to process my feelings about it, and after I processed all of that, and after I came to acceptance with my feelings of it, is when I made the choice to, for me, help myself by using this medicine that,
mhm,
was gonna jumpstart my journey to getting back to where I was in a comfortable place, where I felt light and healthy, um,
mm,
'cause that's the other thing about body image. I think we get so consumed with the visual image of what our bodies look like versus how we're treating our bodies and how that impacts how we feel.
mm,
And the
mhm,
first one is going to give you short-term temporary motivation. The second one is
mm,
gonna give you long-term, long-lasting, um, results and,
mm,
practices and discipline, and because your mind and your body will start to crave it. So anyways, I say all of
mhm,
this, and feel free to ask me whatever you want here, Dr. Coleman, because
mm,
I've kind of
mhm,
said I'm happy to be our guinea pig in these episodes
yeah,
when we don't have a guest joining us, because I would love to have guests join us at some point. But yeah,
mhm.
that's kind of where I'm at with it. What are your thoughts around GLP-1 drugs and how they relate to, um, self-image, the self-image crisis that exists in our
Yes.
society?
Yes, it is. Well, thank you for bringing up all of that. And again, your vulnerability is your superpower. So we're always so grateful to hear from you. I'm also really proud of you as a friend and also as this professional in this space to be able to boldly verbalize this is what works for me. This is part of my journey and my path and my history. And at this juncture in my life, this is something that I assess with myself. Like maybe talked with a professional about to see about like what are the determinants for me to make these decisions. We want to
Definitely.
be self-aware, we want to do our due diligence to look into different risks and different options when we are weighing out our options to help us make the best informed decisions for ourselves. That's very different than I'm being swayed and pulled into a culture or a trend or a pressure to be answering a call to something that will give me some peace in this anxiety that I have to fit this certain norm that I've been told I need to fit. That's very different than my history of hearing negative messages about certain parts of my appearance over and over and over again that now have depleted my self-esteem, which are making me then lean on maladaptive. That means, not so healthy, potentially harmful coping mechanisms like altering my image in maybe sometimes ways that are not things I would have done if I didn't have a sound mind and thoughtfulness about it. That's very different. Do,
Right.
do we see the difference here? So it's very different. And I just love that you're giving examples of your journey in your past and your present. So yes, let's bring it back to the GLP-1 that
Yeah.
is very much of heightened focus in our culture these days. I think we touched on some of these different factors in our first episode, but there are, when we talk about trends, that's another call. That's all we can name it, another call for us to be just again more self-aware, slow down, and be thoughtful. I want us to be really clear too, which I know you would agree with, Melinda, that we are not saying that you struggle with body dysmorphia if you lean on a GLP-1 for support. GLP-1s are not
Right.
inherently harmful, right? But there is a cultural hype around them that plays into the stigmas around beauty and our relationship to appearance that can make us, again, I mentioned before how we can be body positive advocates, and we saw a big push for different sizes recently, and then now we're seeing us being pulled back into this very deep rooted beauty standard of thinness that our culture and society globally has celebrated, especially here in the United States. So we've upheld these beauty standards of thinness. We've seen the different waves. That's why I love that you said bodies can't be a trend because we are all just different, but the waves, they fluctuate. So at one point they were thinness was really ideal. Another point we saw curves really being trendy and people making alterations to that. And then now we're back to, oh, be thin again. So we can't keep up with things like that. And sometimes we're going to lean on these different interventions that we're just responding to. So someone who has struggle with body dysmorphia in the wake of another wave of something like a trend or a pull to be thin, it's going to be a challenge, right? So then leaning on a GLP-1 drug is going to be part of that obsessive or compulsive behavior. But that does not mean that everybody who leans on a medication is doing that in the same way. These medications have helped a
Right.
lot of people with some regulation around their eating, around their thoughts and behaviors that are tied to food, that are tied to weight, that are tied to different health conditions that result from unhealthy weight and behaviors, right? So I don't ever want to demonize GLP-1s for the ways that they have
Right.
served a lot of people, but we also want to be thoughtful about how does that potentially fall into the trend category that then can really be difficult for some folks who struggle with body dysmorphia.
Yeah, and the
Mm,
pressure too, I think when there's all of a sudden, like, this miracle drug that, it's not, it's not like it's magic necessarily, but it is to us. We never had anything like this, and so, like,
mm,
I think it adds this pressure too, like, why don't you just take GLP-1? Like, why are you so it's like there's more pressure around, I think, people who might have come into full acceptance with their body now, like, being triggered or challenged again around, like,
mm,
oh, like, do I have to take this? Or so, I mean, one thing I quickly want to say too is that I'm not advocating at all for anyone to take GLP-1 or to not take GLP-1. I think it's
right.
so personal. I think you have to
It
talk to
is.
a professional. For me, I spoke to
Mm,
my a mental health professional, and I also spoke to my general practitioner. Um,
mm,
but I am curious, Dr. Coleman, what your thoughts are or what your advice is for people who are considering taking it or who feel
mm,
pressured to consider taking it. Like whether
that's a good
or
question.
want to take it but feel judged for taking it. Like
Ooh,
how can we make these um how can we
mhm.
make these sovereign decisions for ourselves?
Yes, that's a good point. It's a good point. Well, again, you stand with as such a good example, right? These are personal decisions, and a lot of us get pulled into the wave of pressure. And again, the wave is going to feel stronger if we have a history of certain insecurities or perceptions about ourselves that are inaccurate, that are negative, that have caused us insecurity, lack of our own stability and groundedness in who we are and how we care about ourselves. Um, that's one side of things. So if if you're doing a bit of a self-reflection in this time of just like, oh, in what ways do I feel like I got my stake in the ground? I know who I am. Yes, of course I'm human. I still have insecurities. Yes, if I want to look into a GLP-1, I'll do that with my doctor. I'll have conversations with people I trust, and then I'll make an informed decision. But if you know that you are perhaps not in such a grounded place, you can feel it, right? I am being called and moved by the wave of pressure and influence versus really finding my footing. then that's something that we really wanna help you slow down with, really get grounded in what are the reasonings. I would encourage somebody, if you need to, journal some of that down, write some of those things down. It's between you and yourself, right? Some areas,
Yeah.
maybe you'll do a little bit of a self-reflective exercise of some of the challenges of how you see yourself. You might write down some specific parts of yourself. You might also have another column that says, this is how often I think about this particular part of my body or my appearance. Just really getting clear. That's what I often have my clients do with cognitive behavioral work, is like slowing down CBT. Um, can really help us focus on some of those distorted thoughts that play into then some behaviors that are not always the best for us. So slowing down
Okay.
a little bit more. If you have a professional in your life, great. If you don't, we can still do some work or you could do some work with yourself, maybe a trusted person to really help you get clear. And then if you're like, I notice something about myself that feels more pulled in a way that's making me be more reactive versus proactive, then that's an opportunity for you to recognize, maybe there's something deeper here that I need to address.
Reactive versus proactive
Proactive.
is yeah,
Mm,
that's good.
mm,
I think as
mm,
someone who has considered changing my appearance many times throughout my life, throughout my adult life, and from a place of deep insecurity and from a place of what feels like now processed security,
mm,
it is
mm,
hard to put into words, but you did it so eloquently. It is hard for me to put into words the differentiation and the feeling that you just feel in your body that, like, for example, I've been considering a couple things lately. I've been considering, obviously, I decided to move forward with GLP-1. I've also been considering doing something called fat transfer augmentation for about a decade. And it's where
wow.
they transfer fat into your boobs. Um,
Mhm,
and I've always loved, I think it's so interesting. I love the idea that it's your fat. It's not a foreign or external, item like an implant that I feel like my
mhm,
body would reject or something. And so anyways, I share this
mm,
because I've been thinking about these things and I've thought about the fat transfer augmentation since I was like in my early 20s. I remember researching it when I
mhm,
lived in my apartment in San Francisco and being like, just in such a place of
mm,
deep insecurity with myself, like newly an
mhm,
adult. My mom had just passed away. I was new to the city. I was so hard on myself and the obsession that came with it versus revisiting that subject in the last couple of years. And more recently, there's such an
mm,
excitement around it because I'm like, I'm going to
mm,
do this for myself. I'm excited about it. It's not like,
mm,
coming from a place of like, how can I fix this? Like researching, like trying to figure out. And again,
mm,
it's kind of hard for me to put into words, but it really is just a feeling. Like I feel excited for myself making this decision for me. And it's a decision that only I can choose is right for me. And it's a part of why I share it too, is because I've come to
yes,
acceptance with that. I have no problem
good
with
for you.
judgment. I'm happy to share these
Mm,
things. And if someone feels a certain kind of way, I honor that, but it's not their body, it's not their choice. And
yes,
and I share this because I f- I feel excited. I feel excited to have gotten to a place
good,
of self-acceptance to make a decision like this and feel wholeheartedly um
mm,
excited. Yeah. And
good,
not
mm,
not beating myself up for it, not making it anything than what it is,
yep,
um, for me.
that's amazing.
And
Yes,
I think, everyone's different, and there's other things that I have considered that speaking of noses, like when the nose filler
mhm,
got super popular, I asked my dermatologist what they thought about the nose filler thing because I
mm,
have a little bump on my nose that, like you, it comes from a long lineage of beautiful
mm,
people that I came to that
Yeah,
acceptance and love for my nose, and I'm so glad I never changed it. And
good.
so, everything can be different.
Yes,
Everything has a different
it can.
personal story.
Yes. I love that you shared that. What I'm hearing through your voice is a release of shame. There's already so much shame
Ah,
in all of this. There's so much shame, and the last thing that Melinda and I are trying to do is provoke or prompt more shame. We're trying to help
no.
minimize the shame in
Yeah.
these conversations, in the way that we perceive ourselves, and I could love that you've come to a place where you are standing on what feels right for you in your body. That's very different than, again, we talked about reactivity, compulsion, obsession, um, that alters the way that we think about ourselves, that probably interferes with, sometimes people have these perceptions so strongly that they won't even leave the house, or you know, only wear certain types of clothes or pound on the makeup, which again, we love makeup around here, but like doing it because they are trying to mask something about themselves that they might perceive is so bad and so ugly and so wrong. There's a different sense, and I hope that you all are able to pick up Melinda's stance on this, and even the way that you shared your voice changed. It's the self assuredness in that decision that feels good for you. That also brings me to think about that was a journey and a process for you, and we don't wanna lose that either. You said 10 years,
Oh my
right? 10
gosh,
years
at
from
least.
going through the process of the pain, the obsession, the pressures from the outside culture that tell us that we have to look a certain way and be a certain size to then land in this place. Some of us continue in that cycle of being that obsession. Some of us react and make some drastic decisions in our lives that don't always fit a groundedness. So I think that's what we're really getting here is, um, I wish that society and culture and pressures weren't so hard on us. I wish that they didn't exist, and yet they do. And then we also know they're ever evolving. So really being thoughtful about how we can monitor that about ourselves is going to be really key. Before we switch and close, Melinda, I also wanted to make sure that I was really clear about how to kind of notice or be aware for ourselves. Of course, talking to professionals is always their best bet. But how do we know we struggle with body dysmorphia? So I'm going to give you a couple of pointers if that's okay.
Yes, yes, please, that
Um,
would be great.
Yes, great. So I mentioned earlier, I'm reading my little list here, but just making sure I'm clear. Frequently checking mirrors or avoiding them. We mentioned that one. So I'm consistently looking
Mhm.
at myself, or I can't even look at myself. I avoid them. Constantly comparing your appearance to others. This, of course, is heightened when we have social media. It's heightened when we have fillers. It's heightened when we're seeing people who look a certain way over and over and over again. It's heightened when we also have different procedures at our fingertips that we can use, which are not inherently bad or wrong, but it can make it a lot easier to grasp and answer some of that anxiety and obsession to that might contribute to the body dysmorphia. Constantly asking others about or for reassurance on how you look, looking for outside validation, um, intense, we talked about these words, intense anxiety, shame, or even depression about your appearance. And we also mentioned the interference with everyday life, so difficulty focusing on everyday life because of your worry around your appearance. So those are just a few of the main criteria or main signs that we can lean on. Again, if you were talking to a professional, I'm sure they would probably unpack that a bit more to see, is there a diagnosis here? Is there a form for treatment? But either way, we can think about some opportunities to help you, and I can share those in just a moment.
Ugh, even just hearing you, like, list those off make me feel like I'm, like, in a cage. I just For people out there who are experiencing any level of this, I'm so sorry, and you're not alone, and there's so much love and support for you, coming from, uh, Dr. Coleman and I, and yeah, I hope that me sharing also doesn't make me sound like I'm, like, over the goal line or at this finish line that is
Mm.
aspirational and unattainable, because I am still very much so on this journey, and before making the decision to consider, any of these things that I mentioned that I've been considering, there's a lot
Mhm.
of processing and still a good amount of pain that came with that. So, um, definitely not saying it's easy. Like Dr. Coleman said, the context of literally a decade of processing that and thinking about these things. And yeah, there's never a finish line, but we get healthier and we get happier along the way. We can only hope.
Okay, so for anyone who is looking for, again, support, we've mentioned professional support from a mental health professional, also a psychologist, a licensed professional, a therapist like me, um, things to really help minimize the symptoms, especially in conversation with a professional, I think is really important. Um, Mindfulness and self compassion. This is one, again, that sounds like, okay, how am I supposed to, move forward with that, with just being kind to myself? How do I even do that? But we want to, when we're in a swirl of the noise, we really want to slow down, sit with ourselves, be really thoughtful about our self talk. That's a huge one because so much of this is um, wrapped in how we not only perceive ourselves, but also how we talk to ourselves. So, Melinda, I don't know about you, but for me, there have been some pretty mean things that I've said to myself over the years that I've had to really work on. Again, we are not closed chapter done with our work, but hopefully in a better place than maybe some of us have been, where the self talk was really loud and was really mean and caused us then to look at ourselves even more so through a negative lens. So, maybe oftentimes what I have my clients do is, again, I like to do lists. One list of your negative thoughts, especially if it has to do with appearance, negative thoughts about your appearance, maybe some things that you say, and then a
Okay.
reframe on the opposite side. So even if it doesn't even feel authentic, even if it's like, I don't think this is real, I love this part of my body. I will be more thoughtful to be compassionate with myself. I'm on a journey towards loving my body again. It can be very different than staying stuck and stagnant in those negative thoughts. Community. This is why these podcasts and you talking out loud about these things with other people really matter, because there's so much shame in it. And what does shame lead us to? A lot of isolation. It leads us to a lot of isolation, and then it makes us feel like we're all alone. And then what happens? We're then stuck in the cycle of our own thoughts. And if our thoughts are negative, it's not going to help us have control over ourselves again. So there are definitely community support groups out there. The virtual world has opened us up to a lot of online groups as well. But even if you had one person that you're just like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, just need someone I can trust to talk through a little bit about this, that person can be a good listening ear. That person, like Melinda said, some folks were just like kind of calling you out, hopefully with love and care, but right, just like, that's not how I see you. I see you as the most beautiful person. How can I then help you get back to that love for yourself? That is just that's such a good friend, a good support, or a good loved one, and so forth. So community, like everything, really does help us not be so focused inward, um, especially in times of need. And then
Yes.
there are medications. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't prescribe medications, but when my clients talk about certain symptoms, I'm all for exploring and empowering my client to make the best decisions for themselves when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to depression, when it comes to talking to a psychiatrist or even a psychologist who does more mental health assessments and tests around some types of things that might be difficult for them. So please don't hesitate to lean on any of these tools. And of course, if you have any other tools that you want to share with us, please feel free.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. I feel like it's nice when you get some like takeaways from these kinds of conversations because you can leave and be like, okay, I feel seen, but now what? um,
Hmm.
and I know everyone always says it, and you even said it as one of your examples, but just journaling, I think, is so helpful, putting your feelings and thoughts down onto paper. To be honest, I haven't been journaling much lately, and I'm I've been my spidey senses have been telling me writing is gonna be coming back into my space soon. So that's good. But I think when I was processing the most, journaling was really helpful because um I don't know if you recommend this as a professional, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but for me personally, sometimes putting my darkest thoughts down onto paper releases them for me. So even if I what I would almost do for myself is if you're having those dark thoughts and they're spiraling and they're kind of circulating, or, dark thoughts as in like negative self-image or saying mean things to yourself about how you look and things like that,
Mhm.
is writing them down on paper and then like burning that piece of paper or ripping up
Mhm.
that piece of paper and then adding Dr. Coleman's recommendation of the reframe after that, where then you
Mm,
can do the two columns side by side and write down
I
some of
love
those
that.
pre-existing, we're going to call them, negative thoughts into, how you can reframe them. But there's something for me
Mm.
like about a tangible piece of
Mhm.
paper that I can burn or rip up that makes it
Mhm.
feel it's a ritual for yourself.
Good for you.
So I'll
Good for
give
you.
that little piece of a
Yes.
recommendation from what's helped me. But
Love that.
um yeah, and yeah, thank you so much for having this conversation and creating a space for us to discuss this and for me to share
Mhm.
and give us your expert POV on, all things beauty related and mental health related because they're
Mhm.
so deeply connected. So thank you
Yes.
for your time.
They are. Thank you.